Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Ask the Voice of Authority, brought to you by Carter Jonas and GLE and Haptic Architects and London Square Partners. My name is Toby Fox. I'm the Managing Director at 3Fox, the marketing agency for councils. And our job is to keep our network of councils and developers and investors and their influencers and advisors connected. And one of the ways that we've been doing that is by interviewing public sector leaders and officers to give our network a deeper understanding of the vision for a place and how it will grow and evolve by hearing from the people shaping that vision and finding out what makes them tick. And you can find an archive of hundreds of written and recorded interviews at thevoiceofauthority.co.uk. Now, the format of these live interviews is simple. We ask the Voice of Authority 7 questions. The first 3 cover their wish list and the challenges they must overcome to deliver that list and the partners that they're seeking help from. And then we're going to ask our Voice of Authority what constitutes good development and who or what has shaped their views on growth and the watershed moments in their life and career that have led them to our screens today. And then finally, we get to ask them what they get up to outside of work. What are the interests and passions that drive and motivate them and perhaps shape those views and ambitions? And we're delighted that today those questions are going to be put to the leader of St Albans City and District Council, Councillor Chris White. And we're going to get the interview started in our traditional manner by asking Councillor White, Chris, what are the 3 things at the top of your wish list for St Albans City and District?
I think right at the top is producing more social housing. One of the things that bothers me is, for instance, turning up in the morning at St Albans City Station and you wait while lots of people get off the train because they're commuting from bluntly cheaper places further north in order to work in the city and district of St Albans. This isn't a sustainable way to go. It would be much better if those people starting out in life or in less well-paid jobs for whatever reason were able to live in either St Albans or Harpenden, and that really isn't the case unless we produce more social housing. There's been a significant problem, obviously, with right to buy, reducing the housing stock. There's no point particularly in weeping over that. It's been going on for decades, but that stock does need to be replenished. I think the second issue is transport. There's a lot of talk about cycling and walking, and cycling is a minority occupation, and we should certainly encourage it. And walking, of course, we all do, but not particularly long distances. When it comes to developments which are not in the middle of town, whatever town may mean, we expect, I guess, people to use a bus. Now, it's not very easy using a bus outside London, and it does really show. Everybody uses a bus in London. It still is omnibus, but it is tends to be the young, the old, the not very well off who use buses, and everybody else gets an Uber, goes by car, and that isn't sustainable. And I think the answer to that is, above all else, frequency. Certainly when I've tried, I don't really need to try from where I live. I can walk into town if I want to, but sometimes I just don't want to because it's raining or whatever it may be. But I've tried it, and it's not a great experience because you wait a long time. The fact that we have deregulated bus services mean that 2 buses turn up at around about the hour and another 2 around about half the hour, so you can actually stand at a bus stop, which is not great fun, for any amount of time. And sometimes, of course, they're late, delayed or whatever, and so even the infrequent buses that we have aren't there for you, so you just give up. And that means more cars, or indeed even electric scooters on the road. So we do need 10-minute buses, and obviously information, and indeed alongside that probably some priority routes. But frankly, you don't really need a priority route if everything's running every 10 minutes, because you don't actually care if your bus is half an hour late if there's another one 10 minutes down the track. And I think the final thing has always got to be, because it's so important to living in a shire, is protecting the green belt, which isn't wildly easy. There is this constant dispute between central government, which says that it's not setting housing targets, and the planning inspectorate, which really is setting housing targets. And that means with the current numbers that we're using, which are based on 2014 census data, we're expected to build on the green belt in order to meet those targets. And local people, understandably, aren't very keen on that. If you use more up-to-date figures, then you'll be able to cut that down and protect the greenbelt much more easily. And that doesn't just apply to St Albans district, it applies to many of the districts in Hertfordshire and beyond.
Thanks, Chris. Now, our viewer, Darian Mitchell, who's a trustee at the London Forum of Civic and Amenity Societies, had a question that pertains to your wish list there around the housing target in particular. Now, in our preliminary blurb for this interview, we mentioned that you've demanded a revision to the target of 4,500 new homes a year in the local plan. So what's the revision that you've demanded and why?
The revision really is just to cut it back to what is actually needed. The targets derive in a complicated fashion using some scary maths, but it fundamentally you can track your way through it with the towel around your head. And that's based on 2014 data. If you use 2018 data, then the numbers crudely halve. It really is that big. This is not a marginal change, and it's something that our neighbours are concerned about. Well, we've worked on this on a Hertfordshire basis. I'm doing it on an individual basis. It's not been that easy really to write to the Secretary of State recently. My original draft was from Uncle Michael Gove, and then he got fired, and so we sat on it, and then fired one off to his successor, but two, I think, who got fired. So, we might as well just dig out the draft I was sending to Michael Gove again and send it off. But we do need to hear a decision. This is not legislation. It's not even, I don't think, a statutory instrument. It's ministerial diktat. And there have been noises about top-down targets from more than one Prime Minister. And Michael Gove, I think, again, is making those noises. So can we have some action, please? Because we're in the middle of drawing up a plan. And it would be nice to know the degree to which we're being forced to use the Greenbelt.
And how do you square that sort of the halving of that target with the need for more social housing? How does that play out?
Well, fairly easily, because one of the problems you get with the essential free-for-all you have if you've got an elderly plan like we do, is that you get more and more executive estates, which is actually tends to be people moving in from London. I did that many years ago, but there comes a point at which you need to look after local people more, and the executive estates aren't going to do that. So if you have units which are social units, then you are going to keep people in town, that your grown-up kids like mine don't leave the area because it's unaffordable, and stay in the area, work in the area, and so forth. So it is easy to square that circle.
Thanks, Chris. And last sort of question is sort of unpacking this. I mean, you've got your CCOS North and CCOS South, the big sort of city centre regeneration sites that you're pursuing. How does the social housing story play into those schemes?
Well, the social housing in CCOS North, sorry, CCOS South, I beg your pardon, which is the one which is being unwrapped literally almost as we speak. That was about 24 hours after local media said, oh, no, it's running 6 months late. Well, housing projects which run 6 months late is quite good, really. But anyway, the wraps were coming off the following day. So
congratulations. And we should shout out for Morgan Sindel, who I think
we should do, yeah. And it's a terrific looking building, and it's a mix. It's got residential, of course, and that's a mix itself of stuff for sale, because we have to repay some of the debt, and social housing, and there's also retail, because surprisingly there is still a demand for retail in St Albans. There isn't enough, so all of those are satisfied. The adjacent site, and we need to get rid of these ridiculous titles, but which is crudely but not only the council's own car park, and potentially bits around it, potentially even the Alban Arena. Although that's it's not at all clear yet. I mean, it's going to have to go on the back burner given the current economic circumstances. Borrowing costs have gone up. Now hopefully they're going to go back down again with the change or rechange of government, but this is not the moment to be incurring more debt, which might be difficult to pay off. So not finished, not gone, back burner, maybe with the gas turned quite far down. Some of the aspects of it, like looking at culture, looking at car parking capacity, will need to continue, but we ain't going to be knocking anything down in the next year or so, I'm afraid. Okay,
and I'm going to save the comments on the Greenbelt until we get to the challenges section of this interview. But just talking through your wish list item number 2, which was around buses. What's your plan? What's your programme for dealing with that? How are you going to increase that bus frequency and bus service? And what levers have you got as a district council that you might be able to pull on to make that happen?
Well, not much in terms of levers, but that doesn't mean there's nothing happening. And I had a meeting with the county council last week, and there seems to be government money around to look at 10 minutes, which is great to hear. What worries me slightly is that the emphasis seems to be on easier bus routes, and there's lots of issues of medieval towns in terms of making bus routes easier. Like, you might have to remove so much parking in certain places that you kill independent shops, which I'm not prepared to do, which is why I think actually having the frequency is the main thing, because if you have that, then automatically the traffic problems will alleviate. You know, we will get on buses. I mean, we all do it. If you go to a city in this country or abroad and it's got trams, you almost find a reason to use a tram, don't you? Because you want to be on a tram. And being on a modern bus, you know, hydrogen driven modern bus is an exciting thing. So it's getting that balance right. So county are going to be talking to us, they're talking to others. They want to do a lot more in terms of inter-town travel. So for example, and this is only a small example, between St Albans and Hatfield, and that's the right thing to do, not least because there's a university in Hatfield and people want to go there. So they'll be talking to us as a district, they'll be talking to county councillors along the route. So that's potentially exciting if we get it right, if they get it right.
Fantastic. Thanks, Chris. Okay, we're going to move on to challenges now, the challenges that you see in delivering your wish list. And when we were talking in the preparation for this interview, I mentioned that I felt that St Albans City and Districts is right at the nub of a number of kind of themes that are really pressing on local authorities everywhere. And you're sort of a kind of demonstration case of all of these things. And the Greenbelt issue is a particularly tough one to overcome, isn't it? So for example, you've got it's Hunston Properties had a scheme at Sewell Park, 150
Indeed.
homes on Greenbelt. Yeah. There was a challenge to it. It's been overcome, challenged by a local group. But that's right at the heart of the growth debate, isn't it? What is growth? What does growth mean for St Albans City and District, and how are you going to be able to accommodate it?
Well, it's got to be sustainable, and that's a word which is thrashed into imbecility, really. You know, but you're not going to have a sustainable development in a deregulated bus system, which is in the middle of nowhere. So the days when you'd say, well, here's a field that no one's going to object to because it's a long way away from anyone, those days are gone. It's got to be essentially on the edge of settlements. And that particular site was on the edge of settlements, but also internally, it's got to make sense. So there's got to be the facility for EV charging. There's got to be a good balance between pedestrians and vehicle traffic. There's got to be the ability to generate its own local energy, so there's got to be the facilities for solar panels and so forth, both in terms of a local network and in terms of feeding into the grid. All of those things have got to exist as well. And I think people feel that somehow there is a further mechanism of appeal, that if you could do JR, you can get the judges to overturn the decision of the council. That is a common misconception. Judges will only say, at most, the decision wasn't properly reached and hand it back to the council. It's not a further court of appeal. That doesn't exist for objectors. It does exist for developers, and there's a debate to be had about whether it should be equal, which I won't go into here. And there will be more of that, certainly, because that was what was in the draft local plan, and that's certainly what's coming through the system. And it will be difficult for the council credibly to resist those. And don't forget, the council has a judicial responsibility here, and very deliberately I do not sit on the Development Management Committee. I do not call in things to the Development Management Committee because it would look as though I was instructing my colleagues how to vote. So I don't want to be sitting in court bored one day whilst that suggestion is ludicrously made. So I keep out of that, and so there's nothing I can do politically to tell developers where to go, other than make sure that as soon as we can, we get a local plan in place. Now, you asked about challenges. There's a massive challenge here, and I think we do have to face up to the fact that the Planning Inspectorate has gone almost rogue. Its role surely is to make sure a council hasn't so far strayed out of line that its local plan is ludicrous. It is not its role to, or should not be its role, to look at a plan in detail and say, well, that site's no good, this site should be there instead. That's not how it should be done. And some councils in Hertfordshire who reached the end of the road and gone to inspection have found that they're sitting waiting for an answer for 4 years. That is ridiculous. Nobody benefits. There is nobody who benefits from that. Developers, local residents, you name it, nobody benefits. And that's got to stop, because otherwise we're all going to take longer and longer to get our local plans up to date. And we're not the only one who has data plans and is struggling.
What's the route to changing that situation, Chris?
I think one of the problems with planning law is that it's been tinkered with and tinkered with and tinkered with. And normally each tinkering produces a worse result. I mean, that's a bit of an exaggeration, probably a lot of an exaggeration, but I remember when I started, you had SERPlan, which looked at things on a regional basis and set very, very broad targets. And then the county council was the structure planning authority, which set broad targets, which the districts had to fit in with, and everyone would go to the county council and tell them they were all rubbish and they were never going to vote for them again. And then there'd be a vote, and then the structure plan would be produced, and then everyone knew where they were. And we don't have that anymore. It was such a simple, good system that obviously somebody decided it needed to be dismantled and replaced by something which is not far off anarchy, and which has handed much more to the planning inspectorate than is right. I mean, the point about the county council is it's elected. The planning inspectors are not.
Fair point. The other challenge I wanted to pick out was around what you were talking about earlier, the economic circumstances that you find yourself in as you try and bring development forward, as you try and create more social housing. How confident are you that you can maintain your sustainability targets, you know, that you can pay the zero carbon premium, if you like, on development, given that economic circumstances are already sort of slowing down or stopping regeneration coming forward?
I think no one can be confident about anything at the moment. I'm sorry to be glib, but that is the situation. We can but try. We need more tools. I was encouraged to see overnight, I think it was, a minister saying that we needed green investment. We do need government green investment to make that sort of thing easier, and indeed powers at the local plan level to insist upon green solutions to new housing, which have to some degree been stripped away. They need to come back. I mean, there's a constant tension and indeed contradiction in the policy that we face between those who think it's all about markets and those who think, you know, the markets are not going to deliver what we need. And we have to resolve that and stop messing with it. Just make it clear. I mean, we're talking about activities which go on for years and years and years, if not decades. And so tinkering with them every couple of years or so, or constantly saying there's going to be another bill. There's going to be another bill. A minister gets up and says, I'm against such and such. And I've seen some councils have actually pulled their local plan in response to a government spokesperson speaking at a party conference. Well, goodness me, that was probably not wise. And I wouldn't have done it. I didn't read Gove's 300-page document on the grounds that I had no confidence that there was any chance of it being implemented. So I had other things to do with my time. There is a lack of certainty. And yes, let's have a green agenda and stick by it. And that means making it easier, for instance, to put solar panels on places. It probably means accepting that, and there will be those who object to this, but there we go, onshore wind farms need to come back. You
didn't happen to apply for an investment zone, did you?
Well, we did actually, because why not? I mean, express an interest. I mean, this is it. That's supposed to apply for one. I'm not sure anyone else did. No, I think quite a lot of people did. I've seen the figure 200 or something like that.
Yeah, lots. I mean, pretty much every local authority we're working with.
And that was in relation to the Hemel Garden Communities project, which is already underway, and therefore it made sense for that very small area that pushing it along a bit, getting investment in, because it's costing us 300,000 a year just to keep that one going. 300,000 we no longer have because of the budgetary constraints under which the council operates. So we could have done with a bit of help with that. It would help us move towards a planning brief for it. No particular suspicion or indeed optimism that it would actually happen. And there is a bit of a worry that I'm not sure people have read about investment zones. Actually, neither was such a thing as enterprise zones, because they're very like enterprise zones, but not quite. And there is an enterprise zone anyway in that sort of area, which is of which I'm a director. And I think we're slightly worried that it could be under threat. But I mean, everything's up in the air at the moment. I think it's most unlikely that there will be many investment zones, and there may be none.
Well, MJ magazine was quoting Michael Gove. I received my copy yesterday, saying that well, he was certainly casting doubt on whether investment zones would become a reality.
Yeah.
But let's extend the conversation there. Let's talk about those partnerships that you need to set up in order to deliver for St Albans. The question is, what sort of partners do you seek to help you deliver your wish list? And I'd like to ask you specifically about your partnerships with other councils, and particularly within the Hertfordshire Growth Board.
Well, the Hertfordshire Growth Board is to me, a very important organisation. You heard what I said about structure plans. You know, we lost the county council's role there, and it was replaced by duty to cooperate, which the moment I read about it, when I wasn't particularly involved in a leadership position, I thought, oh, that's going to end up in court. And lo and behold, it did end up in court because it didn't mean anything. You know, what is it? Duty to respond to emails. When am I being cooperative, or when am I being difficult? When a judge says so, well, that's not satisfactory. And anyway, you're dealing with the wrong tier. The idea that districts cooperate by saying, oh, can you take our extra housing need? Well, you know, we are expected to ask Watford, which has got, you know, is a very tightly bound district, whether it will take some of our housing needs. You'll never guess. They said they didn't think they would be able to. And we've done the same to them, and that's all rubbish, really. Whereas the Hertfordshire Growth Board, we're all sitting around the table. It's actually a statutory body. You know, it meets in public. It has minutes. I'm vice chair. There are 2 vice chairs and 1 chair, which preserves geographical but also political balance. And in many ways, you think, well, it's never going to work because you've got 3 Lib Dem led authorities, 2 Labour led authorities, and 6 Conservative led authorities. Surely it's just going to be political slang. Well, it couldn't be further from the truth. The delight of politics, frankly, is that once you got outside the election campaign, we know what needs to be done and we want to get it done, and that you would struggle sometimes to work out even where people were from, let alone what their politics was. So there is serious discussion about serious issues affecting Hertfordshire. Broadband, for instance. You know, if we're going to have growth, we've got to have decent broadband, and it is wobbly, even in St Albans, which is better than, almost randomly than anywhere else. Conversations I have with colleagues online like this one, some of them are very noticeably wobbly, and I think I know where you live. And yeah, that street is wobbly in the middle, not the end. All that's rubbish, and it's hopeless for business. They've got to be absolutely certain if they move into a new premises, they will be able to trade online. So that's one thing that we're dealing with. And of course, we look particularly at infrastructure. And this is where county got pushed out by not having the structure plan, because the thing about a structure plan, it would say, right, we are going to need these roads and communication corridors and these numbers of schools in order to make this work. And that was there at the front. Whereas the danger is that it came in later with the county council threatening to object to district's local plans before the inspectors. What are we doing? You know, this is one public body accusing another public body in front of a third public body of not actually doing its job properly. I don't think the public think that's a good use of time and resources, and it isn't. The trouble is the public are right, you know, on this sort of thing. So this sort of thing can generate a decent dialogue, decent results. The county council, for instance, has been able to promote its HEART project, which is an east-west mass rapid transit scheme. Still relatively early days. Is it a bus? It's not a plane, but and it's not maglev, sadly. But it's probably something like either a tram system or a guided bus or a smart bus, something like that, because the county is choking. And we need more public transport, as I said at the beginning bit, buses or anything else. All of that is needed and yet we now have a forum by which we can discuss that.
And Connor Sheffield, who's a planner at Stantec and one of our viewers, he wanted to know whether the Joint Strategic Plan can help Hertfordshire address its greenbelt challenges specifically.
Well, I'm as a role which sort of derives, but not fully derives from Hertfordshire Growth Board. I chair the South West Herts Joint Strategic Plan. It's a difficult name, and we struggle with it. We say, well, yeah, it's not a very good name, but anything else doesn't work either. But that's the 5 districts on the west plus county, and we are doing a Regulation 18 consultation on a fairly high level joint strategic plan, and obviously we colour in bits later on as a result of that. And yes, it can help with Greenbelt. It has to be said the districts are sovereign, so if everyone decides to pile everything into St Albans, then we can just walk away. But they know that, and that's the safeguard for both St Albans and everybody else to behave sensibly. We've got to take the rough with the smooth. And if you don't have the conversation, then you get what is happening to a degree, and some would accuse St Albans of this, and I can point my finger at at least 2 other councils who've done it to us, that you stick everything on the edge. So it's really the other districts' problem, which is, again, exactly what structured planning managed to avoid. So yes, I think the answer is with a good wind and good officers, and I think we have very good officers dealing with the South West Herts, JSP, 6-letter acronym that turns into, then we can actually try and solve these things.
Hooray for spatial planning. I'm going to ask you about your partnerships with the private sector as well, but I just want to dig in a little bit first into your property company. You set up a property company. What's its scope?
Its scope isn't anything like as much as I want it to be, and I'm in fact advised by a leader of a council elsewhere in the country don't actually necessarily need one. I mean, the problem is that a lot of districts believe they weren't allowed to build what can loosely be called council housing. That was never actually in the right to buy legislation at all. You can do what you like, subject to money, and money is, as I said, an issue. And a property company can be a device to do that, because you can actually increase the capacity of the council very crudely. Local government salaries don't necessarily match the market, and that's a massive challenge. We are short of planners. By which I mean virtually every council I've ever spoken to is short of planners because we're not paying the wage. And a property company can sort of get around that on the property side of things. So we're reviewing it and working with Watford Community Housing, which in fact was the Almo of Watford Council once. And that becomes, therefore, brings in a partner who can help us look for sites, acquire sites, and develop it. But it's still taking longer than I would like, but we have set it up, and we do believe that it can actually provide some solutions.
So you'd be acting as the developer, with Watford Community Housing acting as the contractor, or?
More working together, bringing in their expertise and potentially having others as contractors, because I mean that they are themselves would employ, they're not much different. Well, they are probably actually are housing associations, and housing associations themselves use contractors when they're building new stuff.
And is that specifically with your social housing program inside?
Yeah. But I mean, not necessarily forever. And indeed, we put in some non-social housing there because we wanted to accelerate the marketing of this social housing, because it wasn't shifting, non-social housing, because it wasn't shifting. It was town housing in the middle of St Albans, which perhaps shouldn't have been there, which was used to fund something which some people liked. Trying to be diplomatic here, and so we were finding it difficult to sell those units, and so the property company was doing that for us.
Well, it could well be that St Albans is featuring in the Direct Delivery Awards, which we've got coming up next May, I think is the next one. There'll be more information about that at the end of this interview. But let's talk about your private sector partners as well. So what are you looking for from the private sector, Chris? What would you, if you had a bunch of developers and contractors lined up in front of you, saying what can we do to help? What would your response be?
Well, it'd be cash and expertise, or cash and capacity, which is more or less the same thing. And we don't employ huge numbers of people. I mean, there's always a feeling, including amongst councillors, that our vast civil service within St Albans district can do this, that, and the other. But we are talking low hundreds here, and that's because of years and years of improved efficiency to some degree, but also just reduced capacity. So we don't have a room full of people who have necessarily the skills. So that's important. But capital is the other side of things. So, joint ventures, for instance, is something I'm always interested in looking at. I mean, please don't write to me because, as you know, leaders have to pass that sort of thing immediately on to officers. So you might as well go to the chief executive first if you're interested in talking to us, and then we can have a conversation. But I think there is a great possibility for doing things jointly, the joint venture partner can make profits out of it, and we can actually do some stipulations. If they match our stipulations, which would be particularly environmental and social housing, then everyone wins, and there's no particular reason why you can't find a deal which would actually work, and would actually work in planning terms. I mean, I've moved a huge distance. I mean, when I came into office in 2019, there was still this feeling that political leaders shouldn't talk to developers, which Eric Pickles had got rid of as an idea under the coalition. I mean, that was gone by about 2012, 10 years ago. And yet there's still quite a lot of councillors and officers who thought, oh, no, you can't do that. You can't do it stupidly. So, broad brush conversations about nowhere in particular is fine. But once there is a danger of a site being specific, an officer has to be present, and very, very crudely, the officer has to be present to make sure that they can actually swear to the fact that a brown envelope wasn't pushed across the table. It's as blunt as that, and so it's there to protect me and also therefore to protect the public. But having a conversation up front about what we want, rather than saying, oh, let's react to a development which is actually pretty rubbish, and then try and change it through negotiation and then refusal and then appeal, is a really stupid way of going about things. And it's not what other councils do. And I had great advice, for instance, from my colleague, the Mayor of Watford, is saying you've got to be talking yourself to these people, with the officers, with the chief executive. And we're very much open for business in that way, and that's, of course, what also the Growth Board is doing. It actually has to develop a breakfast where issues are discussed, and they meet us politicians with our officers, and you get to know each other, because strangely neither side has horns. Who knew?
Well, that's a perfect link into the next section of the interview, which is to ask you what you consider to be examples of good development. So set the scene for that crew at your breakfast. What is it that you point at and say, I'm really proud of being part of that, or helping to deliver that, or I wish we had more of that in St Albans?
It's always a strange game, actually, being the politician, because by definition I'm not only don't manipulate the spade unless I'm planting a tree for a photograph, but I'm not supposed to either, and indeed nor in some ways of the council, because we use contractors, even when we're doing around stuff. That said, and of course we inherit things from others, and we inherited a number of projects which we completed. I think what we did with the Harpenden Leisure Centre is something to be proud of, and the Eric Morecambe Centre, something to be proud of. Harpenden's got some good deals out of that. And it's got a swimming pool, which is going to be an interesting challenge over the next few months to heat, but we are trying to think of ways of doing that for both St Albans and Harpenden, and I'm not sure what the answer is yet, but anyway, as buildings, great stuff. I think Seacoast South, as it literally, as I said, unwraps, is looking good. I think it's going to be called something like Queen Elizabeth Square, or Elizabeth Square, or Jubilee, I think is what the title we're using for it. Which is better than some tired old Roman ones we've been using for too many years.
I like the non-specific Jubilee as well.
Well, quite. Oh, yes. Indeed. I have pointed out to our officers, we be slightly more careful about just looking at Wikipedia before we name something. That there are one or two places which are named after really quite nasty Roman emperors. I'm not sure we would celebrate their equivalent if they were more modern.
You certainly don't want Nero's Passage anywhere near St Albans. So.
Funny you should say that. those are good, but I think there's also the smaller stuff. There's some very nice social housing we've recently completed, which is zero carbon, with air source heat pumps and other stuff coming through the pipeline, and the EV charging points are there, and the sustainability is there, and everything else. And this is the way forward. The most recent stuff that we have had control over doesn't have gas boilers. All the stuff that we finished off did. I'm not saying, oh well, wicked old predecessors. The world changed massively. Why wouldn't you have gas boilers? I mean, gas is great, isn't it? And that wasn't so many years ago. We all know better, and there are better technologies around. And so yes, I'm proud of that, and that's what we need a lot more of. That would be the social housing agenda. I'd love to see a lot more of that if we had the cash and indeed the company and so forth to do it. So that's where we want to be going. How did you deliver the zero carbon homes? That one of them we of course it varies, but some of it's housing revenue account, and therefore it's ours. And there is a project to basically decarbonize the entire housing stock, which is over 4,000 units over a period of time, using grants and determination. So quite a lot is housing revenue account, some is not. There's a project we're doing at the moment in London Coney. We'd acquired a property sort of by accident from a private company which sort of didn't need it, and then it was being used for temporary accommodation for students, and then it was going to rack and ruin, and it was a bit rubbishy, and we've had to make some hard choices about the degree to which we continue with the existing building and knock bits down in order to make it habitable. It's the most bizarre place, actually. It had a sort of strange common room in the middle of it, which for private housing didn't quite work. And so yes, we're using our own contractors for that, but it does vary. The vehicles do vary, and of course they vary. It depends on circumstances. It depends on who you're getting on with, and of course there are housing associations out there who are of variable quality in terms of getting on with stuff and producing units which are of quality. I mean, quality is a problem. I think we all know that. There are blocks of flats in St Albans where the water has failed, relatively recently rebuilt, and that's really not good enough. There are others with props up because they're starting to sag. We have to do better than that as a nation, and we can't blacklist people. We just hope they don't apply again. What about in terms of what development has to offer local communities? You've spoken very articulately about the need for more social housing. Is there anything else that the people of St Albans and Harpenden and the wider district are crying out for? I don't know, and I use that in a positive sense. We don't know where COVID is going. Talking to the railway companies, there does seem to be a pattern emerging. And if you go out on a Monday's very quiet, noticeably quiet, both on trains and on roads. And amazingly, that will be the day then people work from home. And Friday likewise. Friday was already heading that way. So what does that mean? That probably means that the what I characterize as let's go to the pub on a Thursday night and shout at each other in London for 2 hours because it's so crowded. And that's probably going to go. So where are they going to do? Well, they could go to a place in St Albans where they're not going to shout at each other, or in Harpenden where they're not going to shout at each other. So I think there's going to be crying out is quite a strong word, but a demand for more hospitality as people switch their spending from London to this district. And great, that's a massive opportunity. And I suspect if you do a clock around London, you'll find the same price in Guildford and wherever it might be. I think crying out for, I think there is a huge demand for community facilities, and we've recently built something in the Sotwell ward, which is partly through fundraising at local level, partly through selling land we've got and transferring the proceeds into that. We hope to do the same with a building already existing in Fleetwood, which was built in the Second World War. The phrase Nissen and Hut spring to mind, but it's better than that, but it's of its era. I'd like to do more than that, but there is no resource at the moment. So I think that would be one thing we're crying out for. Just back to social housing there. Social housing needs to be in the right place. And there's no point in putting social housing in the middle of nowhere. And that has been a temptation, clearly, to planners of a previous era. Let's stick all these not very well off people in the village. Well, that's really quite cruel because they can't get anywhere. They need to be in the middle where the jobs are, in Harpenden or St Albans in particular, or indeed where other facilities that they might need more than others, like health, is. I mean, one of the things that's happening, interestingly, is that we've reduced the footprint of our own offices because of COVID, because working from home has worked so well, which is hardly surprising if you think about what district council officers do. Many of them are going out in the field, so they don't need an office most days. And it's been taken up over by, well, partly the police. So they've got rid of their police station, which is one of the reasons why we've got the Seacoast North, Seacoast South, but also by the NHS. And therefore, if you do a diabetic eye test, you no longer go to St Albans Hospital, you go into the middle of town, which is the centre, where there is parking, where there is other stuff, where there is public transport to it. That's got to be a benefit. And we need to do more of that. We're talking to the NHS about a blood test. Why do you have to go to a hospital to have a blood test? Why not go to the district council offices? Okay, then don't worry, you don't have to wander, don't have volunteer councillors doing it for you. I can assure alarmed viewers that that's not going to be the case. But it's sweating public assets like that has got to be good, and other places do it. I mean, Decorum, their new offices is shared partly with the county council for libraries purposes, and no doubt others, and that's great. And I know Three Rivers House is shared with the police. So more and more of that, sweat those assets and have them in the middle, and have your social housing in the middle. So you've actually got communities that are vibrant at night, not dead at night.
I should explain for viewers that CCOS, our constant reference to CCOS, is City Centre Opportunity Site, of which there are two in St Albans.
Yes,
there's one developed and one on the drawing board. Yeah,
which is why I don't like it. It's a bit sort of like Stalinist planning, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, absolutely. Yeah. Let's move on to the influences on your views on development, and setting Stalin aside. Who or what has influenced your views, Chris?
Well, Stalin has been wandering around the country. If you actually look in various places, I mean, ask anyone from Sheffield about some of the developments there. And I've read a lot and seen a lot of buildings which are frankly depressing. I was born in Coventry, which obviously was famously redesigned in the Second World War, but it was then redesigned again by town planners in a way which is still less than good. Interestingly, they've just pedestrianised the middle of Coventry, I noticed. And you go around, there's a lot of terrible 60s, 70s and 80s architecture. I mean, for instance, the architect behind Terminal 1 at Heathrow is also the architect behind the Alban Arena. And some people saying it's a brilliant building. Others have a different view. So I have a negative reaction to all of that. But also I know what pastiche looks like, and you can do brilliant new buildings. I mean, St Pancras Station, for instance, is a brilliant combination of old and new. I'm not saying we're trying to do anything like St Pancras Station, but that shows you can go into a thrilling building which is brand new. The new bits aren't great, and we need to have self-confidence. In fact, the whole of that area, as you go towards King's Place, alongside King's Cross Station next to it, is covered in a wonderful mix of traditional warehousing converted to brand new stuff, which is thrilling. And that, I think, is a great influence, is that we can actually do new stuff in a way which I think will work. And I'm hoping what's being unwrapped as we speak will actually fire that up for people as well. And we can't do the green wall that we were planning anymore because Grenfell's told us that perhaps that's not wise, and that's disappointing but obvious. But it's still, I think, potentially great building. Yes, glass is used a lot, and why not? It is a 21st century product. Let's not try and build fake Oxford colleges or something like that simply because we're a medieval city.
But you do have to get that kind of combination of heritage and modern right, don't you? And that is traditionally something that's quite difficult in a place like St Albans. How protective are you of the sort of the heritage of the place?
Well, I'm protective, but I think the best example in St Albans was done by the cathedral, where they've got their new visitor centre, and there were those who said, "Oh, it's a terrible thing." And it is clearly a modern adjunct to partly a modern building, which was their last attempt to do something which wasn't itself unsuccessful, and of course a building which is much older. And I think it works absolutely fabulously. Everything is talked up by the new, and if you can talk up using heritage, using new building, then that's absolutely fabulous. And there's many examples. If you go, for instance, to Winchester, to the county council buildings in Winchester, they've got that mix of traditional and new, and it just makes the old more thrilling. Because if you don't do that, you end up with a ruin. You end up with something which is looking backwards, and we had that really with the town hall in St Albans. That it was, what was it for? You know, it was stained, it was pointless, it was itself anyway pastiche, but hey, it was least Georgian pastiche. And I think we've been, I mean, it's slightly mixed, but I think we've been reasonably successful there about modernizing that. So yeah, you can protect heritage, and probably the only way of protecting heritage is to add on new bits. But what you mustn't do is say, well, this will probably look like this, and let's build a sort of Roman type building next to it. That's hideous.
What about your influences politically? Well, who was it that sort of fashioned your political ideas or shaped them for you when you were younger? And what was that process like for you? How did you become politicized?
How did I become politicized? It was I can give you a sort of exact date, which is sort of February 1974, which sort of dates me. Of course it does, but there was a general election in February 1974, and there was another one later on in the year. The February general election was about who governs Britain, and the Labour Party got most seats and Conservatives were second. We'll talk about the Liberals in a second. And it struck me, well, hang on a second, that's actually not how people voted. People actually voted Conservative and then Labour, and so the election result was wrong. Americans have had more experience of this recently, of course, but it's the same sort of thing. But I also at that time noticed the Liberal Party had done extremely well and got 14 seats, I think, and I thought that was grotesquely unfair. So I became, keen on changing the electoral system, and that was actually the point which directed me, obviously, towards the Liberal Party then and the Liberal Democrats, because that's absolutely core to our beliefs, to the extent which we probably don't talk about it enough. The beautiful irony for me, of course, is that the May elections produced 50 seats for the Lib Dems out of 56, which isn't how people voted in St Albans. I say it proves the point, and I still believe in proportional representation in local and national elections. That's what's been driving me. Everything else comes, the concept of John Stuart Mill and the issue of liberty, and more recently the environment. Not much more recently. I think even back in university days that was starting to bother me.
And where's that drive taking you next, Chris? How are you looking at other kind of political progressions? What else would you like to see changed, and how would you like to take your drive to change the way politics works forward?
Well, you need elected or partially elected and partially appointed second chamber. You can't have what we have now, which is still got hereditary MPs. I mean, goodness me. We would laugh at most countries which had hereditary MPs, but we have it, and we have a huge number of appointees in the House of Lords, some of whom do no work, some of whom are excellent, but they're there for life. Life MPs, I think, is a bit suspect. So you and also, what are you trying to do with the second chamber? It's supposed to be revising. Most countries with second chambers use them as a different way of representation. So in Germany, the constitution, which was designed by the British, of course, that the second chamber is there to represent the Länder, which are autonomous. And so there's clearly something there which sounds a bit like an appeal for council leaders to be sitting in the House of Lords. But hey, in the case of Sharon Taylor, that's exactly what happened very recently, and good luck to her in that. And I think, well, good, because there's no doubt that she will continue to be a voice for local government. You're
talking about your colleague, the former leader of Stevenage.
Yeah, who is a different party, just show what a nice chap I am. So that sort of changes. You have to have a revising chamber, because otherwise the House of Commons might do something completely deranged, and often does. So you have to have someone say, hang on, can we think about this again? If you don't, a unicameral system didn't work under Cromwell, and I think let's not try it again. So that would be a second change. And the third change, though, and which is probably more fundamental than any of those, is we do need to free local government from the shackles of central government. We're amazingly centralised, and I don't think our colleagues in other parts of, say, Europe, actually really understand the degree to which, for instance, we're financially reliant on central government. For instance, we're sitting here worrying about the budget for St Albans, and I could insert the name of any other council, and we don't know what the grants are going to be from government. We don't know what we're going to be allowed to raise in council tax. Well, actually, it's not actually central government's business what we raise in council tax. If we want to do something stupid, then the electorate, particularly as we have annual elections, and always will let us know quite quickly that they don't agree with us. And that will make us think very hard. So just let local democracy work. Let us raise funds locally. Let us control what we do. Let us do our planning without the grotesque interference of the planning inspectorate, subject to some modest checks and balances. And I think things could change rapidly. I would also say that things like permitted development, which, well, yeah, why shouldn't you have to permitted development? Because it undermines the whole concept of planning. We lost much of our office space in St Albans due to permitted development, and one of the things we're having to do with our new developments in the centre of town is build it again. Well, that wasn't very clever, was it? And the quality that we get out of permitted development is, shall we say, at best variable. So it is local autonomy. It would be odd to find a council leader who didn't say that, but I do see day by day the fact and it's sometimes very difficult to explain to residents. Oh, no, we can't do that, we can't do that, we can't do that. And half the problem, of course, is the two-tier system, because they say, well, what are you doing about buses? To which the answer is, well, nothing, because we're a district council.
You mentioned the annual elections. Is that a system that works for you? Are you happy?
And my officers wonder why we do it. It keeps the political parties on their toes. It needn't lead to at least a moderate changes rather than big ones. We had all ups this year because we had boundary changes. The rule on boundary changes is everyone has to be up together, and then you revert in a complicated way back to thirds if you choose so to do, which we have.
But how do you manage that, Chris, when you've got like the city centre opportunity sites? These are sort of visionary schemes. They're going to take a long time to plan out and deliver. You've got a partner in Morgan Sindall in that instance over a long period. Do they not look at that sort of annual election and say that's a really kind of uncertain situation for us to be exposed to?
Well, they don't live to Watford or Three Rivers, I don't think. Watford's a slightly different situation because you've got the mayor who can be defeated by his own council within reason and still continue. It has its attractions. But I think the thing about annual elections, you've only got a third of the councils up, so it's not likely to change hands, and it's predictable. Whereas with elections every 4 years, anything could happen, and then the public are stuck with, could be stuck with a very unsatisfactory council 4 years, front loading all the nasties and not worrying too much about public opinion. It cuts both ways. You can argue both ways, and the way we like to argue it is that it keeps us lean and clean.
Thanks, Chris. Okay, my final question of the interview is about what you do when you're not being the leader of St Albans City and District Council. How do you switch off?
Well, sometimes I go away, which is essential because, and even then, it's sometimes difficult to switch off. I do remember being on holiday in Greece and noticing a huge pothole in a road and thinking, oh, I better report that. And think, no, really, it's not your business. But you do need to give yourself the headspace of going away, and I do that. Hopefully every weekend, every 1 weekend a month, go to another part of the country. But equally, there's the self-discipline. I do worry there are councillors who are clearly sitting looking at social media at 11 o'clock at night, which doesn't seem to be a good way to sleep or to live a life, really. So what I would do when I'm switched off, and my wife is quite insistent on this, so I'm switched off from 7 tonight. That's the end of the last meeting, and sometimes the TV, and I watch a lot of TV, and it tends to be programmed. I've watched Succession. If you haven't watched Succession, you should. But reading, I get through, try and get through about a book a week, which sounds amazingly fast, but if you make time for it, then it happens.
I think you mentioned you read 2 books at the same time.
Often 4 or 5. I mean, they're not laid out in front of me and then going from page. It's not like a sort of chess master type thing, but as the mood takes me. So I'm reading about Fall of the Habsburgs, which is really quite handy because there's actually quite a good thing on Netflix about Princess Elizabeth of Austria. So all hanging together now. That wasn't planned, by the way, but it is working quite well. But also a fairly short novel on which the jury is out, translated from Norwegian, which makes it sound extremely Boffinish, but it isn't. And I'm reading a bit of Browning. So I discovered in my parents' archives Browning's collected works. The jury's still out there as well, but the Pied Piper of Hamelin is great fun. So yeah. Just set yourself some time.
Well, let's dig into that a bit because it's a difficult environment in which you operate, isn't it? And you've been doing it for a while now. What would your advice be to someone entering into local politics now in terms of dealing with the sort of the volume of messaging that's coming at you and the aggression behind quite a lot of it as a politician?
Well, I mean, I wish it were just politicians, but it's not. It's also NHS workers. A very depressing conversation recently with GPs. I mean, officially, not my own GP, but officially, and they and the receptionists get terrible stuff, and it can be face to face with them in a way that is much less likely for us. I mean, it is, don't expose yourself to. I mean, careful who has your mobile number, but also it's not just the aggression. It's there are a lot of people out there who think that they can phone anybody at any time of the day. Well, if you phone me randomly, I'm either here in a meeting, or I've just come out of a meeting and strange enough, I want to go to the next one, or call of nature. These things happen, even councillors go to the loo, or I'm preparing for a meeting, or I'm in the car. So I think my group sort of gets it now. I have to talk to any of them properly, but text me and we'll arrange a time, and then you'll get my attention. And if there are papers, I'll have the papers in front of me. But if you ring me up and say, Chris, what do you think about that? I don't know. So it's getting other people to respect your boundaries as well. I mean, I was doing some support work for a councillor in Hull, which is the new administration. It's something that local government does on a cross-party basis. And so someone from one council will talk through life in the universe with someone from another council. It's just a different perspective, and he was amazing. I mean, he just switches completely off. I think it's on a Thursday night and resumes on Monday. I don't have the guts to do that because I was going to advise him, just make sure you've got your boundaries, but he was very, very disciplined and has different phones, because that's something else you can do, is you can have a councillor phone and a private one. And certainly I've got a private domestic number, so if that phone rings on a Sunday afternoon, it is a relative. It's it's my sister-in-law or my wife's father. It's not someone who doesn't understand boundaries. We're happy to deal with emergencies, but we're not a blue light service. Now, that sounds terribly neglectful, but otherwise I've seen people disintegrate under the pressure.
And you're trying to attract the people of the best caliber, and it's difficult in that profession. How would you describe your leadership style, Chris?
Cool. It's for others to do that, I suppose, but I try to be consensual and consult a lot, but also try to be clear that there are things I won't put up with. I don't like having to speak firmly to council members who've done something really not very sensible. I do have to do that. I normally take someone with me, because that means that at least my version is seen by one other than the person I'm talking to. I try to be cheerful and amusing, but also try to be professional. I'm quite strict about how I go through emails. I don't get it right all the time, and I do miss stuff, and I do get to things too late. But I'm conscious in this day and age that if you do not sit down and do a good quantum of emails first, a wave of emails the moment you sit at your desk, then there's some other stuff, and then another wave, and then make sure you're dealing with the ones which didn't get caught yesterday in those waves, because then there could be someone waiting on a response from you. So sometimes you have to wait, or it's all terribly bureaucratic sounding, but I've got a system. And I can see colleagues who don't have systems, and they start to flounder because they I don't know, they do all emails that have just come in, but they've forgotten the one from Mrs. Miggins saying the street light's not working because it came through at a funny time and they weren't at their desk at the time. And so being methodical is very key, and also saying no. And I've got a fabulous executive assistant who puts into my diary things like no meetings for half a day, because she can see it's getting crammed. Yeah. And I don't have time to do background reading.
We've spoken about that wonderful moment when a conference gets cancelled and,
oh, yeah.
and a page in your diary opens up. Isn't that lovely?
Yeah.
I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about what you were doing before you went into politics. So, and I guess I could phrase that in a different way. In a sliding doors version of your life, what would you be doing now if you weren't in local politics?
My parents were civil servants.
Yeah.
And that led to my father being, in the days when he worked for what was called the Inland Revenue, which we now call HMRC, and their theory was that these were pawns on a chessboard. You move them around the country. So I have variously lived in Coventry, Hertfordshire, Doncaster, and Pinner, simply because of my father's being moved around a bit rather than promoted locally. And I didn't want to do that. Didn't want to do it to me, and I didn't want to do my kids, so I didn't become a civil servant. I don't think civil service does it quite that way anymore anyway, but obviously one is politically restricted as a civil servant. So that was one sliding door. The other sliding door, I'm actually qualified chartered accountant, so I could have gone into accountancy. It wasn't particularly exciting, really. So I sort of sidestepped and went into accountancy training. So for many years, I actually train other people to become accountants and throw them into the front line, which was handy, because it means that speaking and public speaking is a lot easier if you've ever been teacher, lecturer, whatever. It really does show actually in meetings who got those skills and who hasn't. So that's the second sliding door. Beyond that, I don't know really. I guess I was always heading in this particular direction. I've noticed my older daughter, desperate not to go down the same route, but ended up in campaigning on behalf of third sector charities and so forth. So you've not really run away from it, Elias. You've just morphed into something else.
It's in the DNA. Okay, my last question then, Chris. What do you like most about what you do?
Oh, fixing things. Easily fixing things. Something's wrong, you sort it. And the rewards are various, actually. You can get and it can be trivial. People say, oh, I'm sorry to bother you with something so minor. I say, that's what we do. We do minor. We do major as well. But someone has got to do minor. So you get a pothole reported, or you notice it, and you report to the county council, and they either fix it or they don't. Hopefully they fix it, and you can get applause for that. There is a slightly dishonest feeling of imposter there, because you can sometimes get a situation where reported, county knew about it anyway and turned up the following day because it was on their roster to fix. And the resident comes back and says, oh, brilliant, 24 hours, I'm no. And the honest thing to do is admit the fact that it was probably there already. But the harder stuff is obviously more frustrating, and indeed you can get wildly criticised for things which you don't control, and that's pretty miserable when someone's going at your hammer and tongs. Well, why have you not put up that post, which is so easy to fix? Well, because I don't do it. And I will write yet more emails, which sounds a very feeble answer. I write more rude letters. I really will. But actually succeeding in fixing something, even if it's trivial, is the best bet.
And on that note, Chris, we've got to end the interview. So please accept my warmest thanks for taking part in our live interview. Our Voice of Authority viewers, the leader of St Albans City and District Council, Councillor Chris White. And while the virtual applause is ringing out across the internet, I'll thank you viewers for sparing your time to tune in and learn about the man shaping the vision for St Albans. And we're going to be back on Thursday, the 10th of November, with a knowledge sharing webinar, as I mentioned earlier, to learn from Oxford City Council's award-winning housing delivery team. And that's going to kick off our Direct Delivery Awards programme, running from now leading up to the awards themselves next May. So if you're involved in councils building homes, or you'd like to be, and Chris, you'd be very welcome to join us. Details for that event are going into the chat, and they'll be at thevoiceofauthority.co.uk. So until then, from our Voice of Authority, Councillor Chris White, and from Carter Jonas and GLE and Haptic Architects and London Square Partners, and from me and from everyone at 3 Fox, good afternoon.